This is the Town of Moraga Audit and Finance Committee meeting of Monday, March 3rd, 2025. It's 5 o'clock, and we'll call to order. Roll call. Amy McClellan is not here. Member Lou is not here. Vice Mayor Hillis.
Here.
Mayor Wallachy.
Here.
And Treasurer Kennedy. The next item on our agenda is public comments and suggestions. This is time reserved for those in the audience who wish to address the Audit and Finance Committee meeting on items that are not on the agenda. The audience should be aware that the committee cannot discuss items, details, and vote on any non-agenda items. The concerns will be referred to staff or placed on a future agenda. Note that there will also be public input at each of the agenda items. Are there any public comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is approval of action minutes of the AFC meeting of December 2nd, 2023. Do I have a motion?
I have checked the minutes. I agree with them. I move that we approve them.
And I will second that. If there's not any discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
And any opposition? Hearing none, it passes. The next item is review and discuss the selection of financial auditor.
Okay, good evening, Audit and Finance Committee. I'm Katie Bruner, your Administrative Services Director, and you will be hearing a lot from me this evening. So first up is our recommendation for auditing services. Perfect. Okay, and so tonight we are recommending that your committee recommend the selection of Mays and Associates to Town Council to enter into an agreement for professional auditing services for fiscal years 2024 through 25 through fiscal year 26-27, so 3 fiscal years, with an option to extend for 2 additional fiscal years through fiscal year 2028-29. So it is a GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, best practice to resolicit auditing services every 3 to 5 years. This last fiscal year 23-24, was the final year of the town's 5-year contract with Mays and Associates. So the town staff issued an RFP at the end of January with responses due by mid-February. The town received 3 firms who responded to the RFP. And we found all 3 firms were qualified. And so the town treasurer, our senior accountant, and myself, the 3 of us interviewed the 3 firms last week. And with that, our panel, after deliberation, is recommending the continuation of Mays and Associates to be the town's auditor. Mays and Associates is a local mid-sized firm. They specialize in municipalities. And the town has had a great working relationship with Mays over the past few years. Mays has been the town's audit firm for, I think, fiscal year 2011-12, with rotating partners. California regulations do require that we get a new audit partner every 6 years. Vicki Rodriguez, who is here with us this evening for any questions, is our current audit partner. She's completed 5 years as our partner. Mays gave the town to retain Vicki for another year, which we did deliberate a lot internally about, or switch to David Alvey, who is their other recommended partner. And staff is recommending that we switch to the new audit partner for this upcoming fiscal year's audit and for the term of the contract.
His name again is?
David Alvey. And retaining Mays does mean there's a reduced learning curve. Mays is familiar with our chart of accounts. They're familiar with our staff and our operating procedures, but having a new audit partner gives new eyes. Also with some of the projects that we have as an administrative services department, such as implementing a new ERP system and developing a new chart of accounts, having that familiarity and then will help along with our audit process as well. So the annual cost of auditing services will start at around $36,000 per year, rising to about $41,000 by the end of the optional 5th year. Maze's proposal included just over 300 hours to complete the town's audit, which was actually right in the ballpark, and we felt it was a good balance for the price and the number of audits and what meets the town's needs. And with that, I have Vicki is available for questions of the committee, or staff is available as well. Thank you.
I defer to Carrie first.
I thank you for the presentation. A question that I have is on the prior slide. If you can just discuss the longevity credit and whether or not that our expectation would be had we not, if we were not to continue with our existing firm, if that actually represents about the additional we'd be expected to pay.
Actually, we got quite, Maze was actually the midpoint of our proposals.
Okay.
The lowest cost firm had a significant lower number of hours to complete the audit. And we did have concerns about their ability to complete it and the level of quality of service we would achieve. The other audit firm did have a little bit higher number of audits, but it was significantly more expensive. The longevity credit didn't actually play a significant part in that overall calculation.
Thank you.
To a great degree, the Vice Mayor asked my question. The report references cost as one of the factors, but it really did not include any hard data. So I was wondering whether, and I think you just answered it, that it was a balance between delivery and cost, and our own experience, my own observations and experiences that Mays and Associates and Vicki have provided very high quality accounting services, audit services, and I recognize that generally in this area, we hope to at least get a neutral rating, right? You rarely get a superlative rating. It's often you're a mean person to us. Others.
She really puts us through the ringer.
That was not the best wording, but it's when the accounting people, the auditors come, it's not necessarily welcome.
And I'll also say, working with Vic and her team this past year, we've had a lot of complicated GASB pronouncements, and Mays and Associates and their team has been really a great resource for us as staff to implement those pronouncements that are not, they're high on the technicality, less so on the ease of explaining to the layperson of why we're implementing them. So it's been a great asset, and we appreciate them as a resource.
Nope.
I really don't have any questions because I did participate in the interview panel. I do note that Mays happens to be a local auditing firm that also has a number of other municipal clients here in Contra Costa, and so that's kind of helpful to understanding the situation in our county. So at this point, do we need to take a vote on recommending this?
You would need to ask for public comment and then, yes, ask for a motion.
So I will first ask for public comments on this particular item.
Oh, okay, sorry. There we go. So I'm Vicki Rodriguez from Mays and Associates. As just part of the public, I just wanted to thank the town of Moraga and the administrative services staff. It's been a pleasure working with everyone for these past 5 years, and so I just wanted to note this is a great town to work with, and I appreciate definitely the opportunity to continue to work with the town. So, so just wanted to say thank you and just say that it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you. So do we need to take a vote on? Okay.
Move approval of the proposal to continue to engage Mays and Associates as proposed.
Second.
So it's been moved and second. Any additional discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Next item on our agenda is review and discuss recommended changes to the reserve policy and allocation of general fund unassigned fund balances in excess of the 50% reserve requirement.
All right. Katie Bruner again. So tonight we are asking the Audit and Finance Committee to review, discuss, and recommend that Town Council update the town's general fund reserve policy, and as well as recommend allocation of general fund unassigned fund balance that is in excess of the town's 50% reserve policy. So the town's current reserve policy was established in 2009 and updated in 2015. It established a general fund reserve equal to 50% of the prior fiscal year's operating expenditures. Unassigned fund balance for the general fund, which is a GASB fund balance classification designation, is the general fund reserve per our latest resolution. And then our current reserve policy establishes that any excess fund balance shall be transferred to the town's asset replacement fund. So staff is recommending the following changes to the town's reserve policy. First and foremost, we're recommending that we designate a general fund reserve as a committed fund balance in our fund designation. So the unassigned fund balance is only allowed in the general fund per GASB 54, and it's basically funds that are available for any use. And so moving our reserve to a committed fund balance really makes clear that our committed fund balances represent a portion of fund balance that can only be used for specific purposes pursuant to constraints imposed by formal action of the government's highest level of decision-making authority, which is the town council. That's our language in our GASB 54 resolution. So by moving our reserve to a committed fund balance designation, it actually shows it is committed specifically for emergency reserves, and then it can only be used as authorized by town council. So it's a little more restricted. Also on our fund balances at the end of the year, we would have a line under our committed fund balance that would say general fund reserve. So this would also clearly define where our town reserves are held on our balance sheet. We are also recommending that we calculate the 50% reserve policy upon the current year adopted budget. And actually, I'll demonstrate why in a slide or two as to why we're recommending this. We do this in practice. When we're looking at allocating our excess reserve, we're also looking at what we need in reserves for the future year. And if an adopted budget is what we are authorized to expend and appropriate per town council, and our reserve policy is to have 50% of our operating expenditures, then it makes sense that we would want to have those funds in reserves based on our budget, not based on what we actually spent last year. And then last, this is kind of really, I'd say the first two are a little more administrative and help out my team and the finance staff. But this last one is we would recommend to allow fund balances exceed our 50% reserve policy to be allocated by town council for one-time uses. In addition to contributions to the asset reserve policy. So this gives a little bit more flexibility to town council to take into account short-term or long-term needs that the town may have, rather than all of it going to the asset replacement fund. And as I'll recommend later, is we can put a portion to asset replacement, a portion to some other one-time needs or reserve funds, or even potential one-time capital projects. I want to be very clear, we are recommending that any funds above our reserve level should go to one-time funds. We don't want to put them towards ongoing costs and create a structural deficit or an ongoing budget problem. So we do want to use one-time money for one-time things. So this slide will demonstrate why why we're recommending to use our current budget. So in fiscal year 23-24, as of June 30th, the town had an ending fund balance of about $8.3 million. Our 50% reserve requirement was about $5.5 million. And so we had about $2.7 million over our reserve requirement. If we look towards our total recommended adjusted budget, these includes the adjustments we're recommending later this evening. Our estimated ending fund balance, assuming everything stays the same, is $8.4 million. Our 50% reserve requirement jumps up to $6.4 million. And so that leaves $1.9 million of fund balance above our required reserve level. And so it's a big jump from year to year, depending on, especially going from actuals to budget as well. So staff is recommending at this point that you recommend to town council the allocation of $1 million to the asset replacement fund, and then contribute $500,000 to the Section 115 pension trust. So the asset replacement fund is a fund that funds our maintenance and improvement projects to town facilities. It also is used for replacing capital equipment such as vehicles and technology, other equipment, police radios. It is funded through additional contributions from one-time fund balances. So there is not a specific ongoing funding source at this point in time. And then the current fund balance as of June 30th, 2024 was around $621,000. That balance is fully committed to either equipment replacement purchases this year, capital projects that were identified in the capital budget. So, and then any additional contribution to the asset replacement fund would really likely be programmed during this upcoming budget development cycle, this two-year capital budget. The pension trust is, town established our Section 115 pension trust in fiscal year 22-23. We contributed $1.5 million of Palos Colorado's funds. It has a current balance of just under $1.8 million, so we've earned $250, just shy of $300,000 since it's been invested. And the point of the pension trust is to smooth the impact of rising pension costs on our operating budget. And as I will show, our pension costs are projected to increase dramatically, and peak in about fiscal year 31, 32, 32, 33. So this, we know we're going to have pension costs impacting our operating budget just solely based on projections. And so that's why your council established the pension trust a couple of years ago. And so we're looking to recommend to contribute to that additionally. For reference, the unfunded accrued liability is the difference between the estimated cost of future benefits and the assets that they've already set aside to pay for them. It's impacted by a lot of different factors from CalPERS. Just to give you a sense of the jump that we've seen over the past few years, our town's UAL was $765,000 this fiscal year. It's projected to reach $1 million in fiscal year 28 or 29, and then it'll continue to go up from there for a few more years. So before falling, hopefully. So again, our recommendation for your committee is to recommend to town council to update the town's general fund reserve policy. Really, the excess fund balance may be allocated to one-time needs, not just the asset replacement fund. And then recommend allocation of that general fund assigned fund balances that currently exceeds the 50% reserve policy to the asset replacement fund and to an additional contribution to the pension trust. And I'm available for questions.
Hi, a couple questions. Thank you for that presentation. So one is, can you just go through how we ended up with a surplus so large?
Yes, so in part, and I will go back to, okay, so our 23-24 actuals in the general fund, you'll see that our revenues were $12.6 million and our expenditures were $12.7 million. That $12.7 million of expenditures, we moved our pension trust out of the general fund into an internal service fund. So it didn't go away, it just, we are accounting for it differently in fiscal year 24. So That's about 1.6 million. So we actually, if you take that out, because that's just a transfer of funds internally, our revenues exceeded expenditures by about $1.5 million. So that's a portion of it. The other portion is in fiscal year 23 when we established the pension trust. It went from the Palos Colorado's fund to the general fund. When we report those in our ACFR and our audited statements, those are all one fund group. And through accounting rules and presentation purposes, those transfers get reclassified and go. They're not stated on the statements. They're reclassified out. And because we actually used Palos Colorado's funds, we talked with our auditor about restating our fund balances to make sure that the fund balances in Palos and the fund balances in the general fund accurately stated where the money from that contributed to the pension trust where it came from. So that's how you get to about 3 million ish, and then there's always your unassigned fund balance. It's never straight unassigned plus revenues less expenditures, new unassigned fund balance. There's always a little bit of reclassification between the fund balance designations at year end.
I have two other follow-up questions for you. One is, the asset replacement fund is effectively zero now because the funds that are there are committed. And the suggestion to designate 1 million of the excess fund balance to that. What are this is for the 2-year budget, right? So do we have specifically identified assets that would be that are up for replacement that would come to that, or?
So there's that fund is both used for equipment replacement and for capital projects. During the capital budget, there's definitely a discussion about what assets are up for replacement, what maintenance or larger improvements are needed using that fund. Sometimes that fund gets used for matching funds for grants. So because it's not a restricted funding source, there's a little more flexibility in what it gets used, and we have to balance what are the immediate capital equipment replacement, what are the immediate capital needs. So that's a discussion that we haven't had yet, but we'll be having as part of the budget development.
Got it. Well, I'm glad to see that we got the electricity fix in this building. I definitely think that one of the things that we should consider is whether or not renovations are needed to this hall. The other question that I have is the number for 500,000 to be allocated to the pension fund. Where do we get that number?
It's kind of we're looking at, we might need to use the pension trust in a couple years. So how can we contribute more to earn more revenue, earn more investment on it, but also not over contribute at the expense of other capital needs, other town needs. How can we maximize those earnings and maybe maintain that balance for the long term? So it's a little bit of how do we find the balance between what do we know we need for, what we may need for asset replacement. I will probably say it's not enough, but it's something. But so it's more of a balancing act, and that's kind of our general recommendation there.
And last follow up on that: do we know how close with that additional contribution will be to covering the town's unfunded pension liability?
Oh, I mean, as I'll talk about in a later agenda item, I think that is a much more fuller discussion about how we use the trust, when we use the trust. My understanding of when we established a trust is we really looked at trying to hold on to it and not use it until our UAL reached about $1 million, so that we know where that is about, depending on CalPERS returns. So that would also be a conversation we would have with our pension trust advisor as well about how to invest it, how to maximize it, especially in the current market conditions.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I echo that how you use the money and assign it is a very complex issue that as long as I've been on the town council, we've been wrestling with. My questions sort of, at the bottom of page 2, item 6. Let's bring that back up again. we're recommending, it's worded as a change, and yet to the pension or to the designating general fund reserve as a committed fund balance as outlined in Resolution 24, 2011. And that's a change. I'm not sure I understand it. If we did that in 2011, why is it now a change?
So the resolution, sorry, let me pull the right number there. Resolution 2411, let me pull up the attachment there. Attachment B. So GASB 54 required government agencies to go through and say, these are all the different types of fund balances. So the general fund always has an unassigned fund balance. We didn't further, at that time, there was no further classification of fund balance committed of what that might be or what those specific committed fund balances may be. But if you look at attachment A, our resolution 5/2015, on the second page, it does explicitly say, now therefore be resolved that a general purpose fund reserve policy is established such that net revenues from each fiscal year end shall be retained in the general fund unassigned fund balance in order to achieve a general purpose fund reserve equal to 50% of general purpose fund. So that 2015 resolution specifically said our general fund reserve policy should be, our general fund reserve should be in the unassigned fund balance classification. So that's the change that I'm recommending, is we're no longer going to hold the reserve funds in our unassigned fund balance. We will actually move those funds through adjustments on the balance sheet into a general fund reserve line under our committed fund balance.
I see. Okay. So to some degree, to me, it comes across as semantics, but that's...
It is a little bit, but if we're
Okay.
taking the change, I want to be very explicitly clear that to make sure that we are all on the same page. It is more administrative in how we account for it.
And I think you answered tonight my other primary question, i.e., which was the bullet at the bottom of page 3, with regard to the recommendation and the uses. And so we've got, 3 categories of the one-time capital projects and the pension trust and the asset replacement. But sort of related to this, and of course, again, we're dealing with when we have surpluses, yet not jumping ahead, but our 10-year forecast shows a pretty quickly a deficit situation, and I'm not sure yet whether it's structural or not. And so this may be a very short-lived opportunity for us, or luxury.
Hopefully,
And how does this all take that into account?
Hopefully that's not the case. There's a lot of my forecast presentation has a whole lot of caveats for you guys, and we are required to pass a balanced budget. We're a local government. We don't have. I mean, we can issue debts and whatnot to pay for our needs, but at the end of the day, we have to pass a balanced budget.
Right.
So we have to take into account how we balance the budget, and we have to look detailed, and we have to balance our operational needs with our larger capital needs. It's all a balancing act, and there's no one right answer. A budget is a planning document. You do your best with the information you have available, and we adjust and adapt as we get more information. That's why we do a mid-year budget update. So it's, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, rather there's pontificating about
Right, but you're not recommending that you feel sufficiently comfortable with that 10-year forecast that we're not going to keep that extra $500,000 in reserve.
No,
Because there are ways we can actually use that money, but
Yes, and we have to look at, those are conversations about, and this gives us, I think this change in the reserve policy gives us a little bit of flexibility when we have uncertainty. We can hold off to see what the next budget looks like before allocating every last drop. I think this time last year, I was up here saying, I'm going to recommend we don't transfer funds to the asset replacement fund because we're going to, we have a budget to transfer it in, so we're going to transfer it in to transfer it out. So it gives us the flexibility to look at the overall picture as well.
And my last question is just to remind me, how do we define the difference between an operating expenditure and a capital expenditure? What is it, a dollar amount that we?
We do have specific capitalization thresholds. We have a capitalization policy, and I think improvements are about $50,000. Is that about right? And then capital purchases, like equipment, is $5,000 or greater, and I think new capital projects are $100,000. So that's kind of our general. And then there's discussion about what's operating and the project type as well goes into it.
We have definitions, and that's part of the equation or part of the criteria.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
So that the first item of creating a separate account for the 50%. So you would actually do a journal entry to take 6.44 million and move it into a separate account? Is that what?
It would be a fund balance designation on our balance sheet in the general fund. So it wouldn't be a transfer out. But what that would allow us to do as staff is the finance system, nets out revenue expense at the end of the year, and it would sit in its own designation.
It'd be two lines, the 6.44 and then a few, 100,000.
And then our unassigned fund balance would be whatever is left over.
Whatever was left over.
Yes.
1.94
And
in this case. Okay.
and
So is there any special restrictions on taking money out of the 50%? There are some municipalities that when you've got something in reserves, the council needs to, with maybe even a supermajority of 4 members, vote to take money out of that for an emergency. Is there any, there's no provision that you're putting in here.
no.
The question is, should there be?
So the committed fund balance designation has already established that the highest decision-making body, so town council, has to approve using those committed fund balance. So that would, by nature of it sitting in there, now town council could recommend or ask that we say it needs to be approved by a supermajority or something of that case. But it's already set aside and it's showing that this is specifically for this purpose, emergency reserves. And the resolution that would get adopted would kind of use some of the similar language that we already have about catastrophic, economic event, natural disaster are types of uses that reserves could be used for.
Wouldn't that be normally done as part of the budgeting process that's going to come up in May type timeframe?
Typically as well, if we needed to recommend it, but sometimes sometimes during the pandemic didn't happen during a budget development cycle, so there would be other decisions that if a true disaster happened or.
Chair, if I may. Having worked in the legislature in a period of time where auto budgeting really got us into a lot of trouble as a state and really hamstrung the flexibility the legislature had to close budget gaps, I'm generally opposed to the supermajority concept because I see it as hamstringing the flexibility that future councils would have. I was actually going to ask a different question on the pension trust, and it's along those similar lines. I can imagine eventuality, given the winds above us at several levels at this point, where we have a catastrophic emergency. There is no money available from the federal level to help us. The state is in a budget deficit. We're on our own. and perhaps even our reserves aren't able to account for what we need to try to close the gap. For our pension fund, I know that sometimes when couples are looking to pull together funding for their down payment on a house, they can do a loan against their own 401ks that they then pay back with interest. It's a loan against yourself, basically. Are we allowed to loan against the pension fund in the event that we needed revenue, where we're basically loaning from ourselves and paying back with interest?
I would have to research that. I don't know that off the top of my head. I do know with the pension trust, it's not just UAL, it's normal pension costs. So if we can say we are using it for pension costs, then it is an authorized use. The loan question, I'd have to go back and research.
Thank you.
Speaking of the pension, you had that graph there with the various bars, and the original pension trust was set up with the idea that as soon as that one of those bars went above $1 million, you'd use money out of the trust to bring it down to the million level. You should be able to go through and figure out how many dollars we would need, and I guess the question is, do we need to put another 500,000 in there in order to make that work? Or you have some input on that?
Yes, so this chart this is about 20 years, and CalPERS will let you run a tool that puts you about 30 years out. And believe it or not, in 30 years, that UAL is going to be zero. I don't think that's the case. I don't think we're ever going to get to zero. I do think it's going to smooth out and it's going to stabilize. That's the hope. There's, how you calculate PEPRA and pension reform. So I think, and a lot of this depends on CalPERS market returns, how well. So every time they exceed 6.8% in their returns, that helps smooth that out a little bit more and shaves them off the top. But every time they don't make that 6.8%, even if they get 6%, that still makes it go up a little bit higher. I'll talk more. I have a lot more information on CalPERS. They look at their discount rate and their actuarial assumptions every 4 years, and they rebalance this. So it's continually changing, and I think the reason we put the pension trust in is the reason why we're not taking a big down payment on our UAL at this point, because chances are it'll just pop back up and cause a similar problem down the road. So I think the hope is, even if it smooths out, I don't think it's going to smooth. I think it's going to be a longer peak than maybe we are currently forecasting, just based on the data available, is my judgment.
But if you were to go and do that and say anything above $1 million, and you add up all those numbers, how close does it come to the 1.8 million we've got in the trust right now?
I can do that exercise. I just
You might want to, because you're asking the council to move $500,000 in there. Once it's been moved in there, you can only use it for pension stuff. So you don't want to overmove. If we've decided that we can, going forward, handle up to $1 million, then once it gets beyond that, we would then just expense that as part of expense. Let the record show that Amy arrived about 5:30.
Do you need documents?
Amy, do you have any questions? Yeah.
Treasurer, if I can, a couple comments. And I was involved in the discussions that the $1 million was just a number we threw out. And, as Amy, or as Katie communicated, it's a very dynamic situation, including, interestingly, back in 2019, 2020, when we really looked at it in depth, potentially at that point setting up a pension trust, it became apparent that there's really no incentive to prepay. that they sort of give you a 2% credit and it just disappears. And so it's not attractive to do that. At least that was the story at that point. I don't know that it's changed. And we do have, just real quick, we do have the opportunity, by the way, if we get into a situation where our budget is really hamstrung, you can use some of this money to pay for the pension, and it allows you to use an equivalent amount of money out of the budget for your other expenditures. So there are ways to utilize the money.
And for reference, our pension costs, including UAL for this fiscal year, are about $1.3 million. So about the full, and continue to go up.
As long as your pension trust is, if it were $15 million in there, then you might have trouble getting money out. But this amount we could probably be somewhat flexible on.
Yes.
Amy, did you have any comments or questions?
I don't, thank you.
Okay. Any other things? So you're asking the committee to recommend, well, there are three different things here. And I guess the question is, are we doing all three of them at once, or do all three at once?
Just accept the recommendation of the staff to move forward. If I could make one more communication, and that is, especially the 2015 policy that really communicated to use these excess funds for asset replacement was driven by the fact that we had no funds at that point. The town was so strapped for just operating and bare minimum costs that was the basis for that, in addition to some degree to not prevent, but to encourage the town council not to spend the money on other things that are not so critical. Anyway, I thank you for your indulgence of my position.
So before we go any further, are there any public comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll return to the committee. Do I have a motion to accept the recommendation?
I'm second. I think the mayor had a motion.
Basis all the information, I recommend that we go forward with the recommendations of staff. That includes updating the town's general fund reserve policy and allocating the general fund unassigned fund balances in excess of 50% reserve policy with regard to the 1.6 million approximate surplus at this point, 1 million to asset replacement and 500,000 to pension trusts.
Second.
Any more discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes.
Chair, do you mind if we take a quick break? It's one of those things I should have gone before I...
We'll adjourn for 5 minutes.
Katie, could you confirm, my microphone was off when I made that motion. Could we confirm?
We are back up recording, but I would, we can call back to order when you're.
So call the committee back to order, and we finished that item. The next item on our list is review and discuss the fiscal year 2024-25 mid-year revenue and expenditure report excluding the Hacienda de Las Flores operating budget.
So, as mentioned, so this report does not include any detail on the Hacienda operating budget, which will be presented separately. So again, the recommendation this evening is to recommend fiscal year 2024-25 mid-year budget adjustments to town council for adoption. So before we get into the recommendations, I'll do some high-level results of our general fund as of December 31st, 2024. So for our general fund revenues, overall, we're about 30% to budget through December 31st. This is actually normal for being halfway through the fiscal year. The property taxes come in October, December, April, and June. So that is historically on par with where we've been compared to budget. Sales tax is always 2 months behind of when you provided your contribution at the brick and mortar store. So these are actuals through about October. Franchise fees come in about quarterly, and then so everything else is a little bit in there. So our department revenues are about 43% to budget to date. And then our transfers in occur at the end of the fiscal year when can we officially close the books. Our general fund expenditures are 52% through the end of December. And general government includes our UAL payment and our insurance premiums for the town, which is about 1.2 million this year. So that's where that comes. And then Parks and Recreation, the numbers in there also include some special events. It was a big year this year with the 50th anniversary. So, and so that's kind of where we are year to date. So we do have some recommended budget adjustments. This year we are recommending to increase our property tax revenues by about $50,000. When we get our first property tax distribution in October, we get a statement of what we actually will get in the fiscal year. So that's where this number comes from. We're also recommending an additional $66,000 in Parks and Recreation revenue, specifically for summer camp enrollment. This brings it in par with where we were last year. And then also special events. We've had a good showing so far for the special events we've had year to date, and then taking into account the special events scheduled for the rest of the fiscal year. And then for expenditures, we're recommending increased expenditure appropriation, both for Parks and Recreation, $41,000 for temporary park staff. This is so all those kids who signed up for summer camp can have camp counselors at summer camp. And then an additional $25,000 for special event supplies and materials, again, coming up for what's planned. And then this also includes the merchandise that we sell at the Pear Necessities store. Did you like that plug? So this is the attachment B to the staff report. This is the entire general fund budget, and this is our amended budget showed a very slight surplus. Contribution of fund balance of $32,000. With all of our budget recommendations, we're recommending a total adjusted budget appropriations of about just under $13 million and a contribution to fund balance of about $83,000. So this is the total impact of everything we'll be presenting this evening in 2 items. And then last, there is a recommended budget adjustment in our ARPA fund. And this is a administrative, making sure we have appropriation to transfer out. The cash has been spent, or for some of our capital projects obligated per federal regulations. We have some storm drain capital projects that we have obligated ARPA funds, and Sean and his team are furiously spending away at the money. And so we really just need the appropriation to transfer the funds out into the capital budget fund. So some cleanup. And that's it. So we're back to the recommendation to recommend the fiscal year 25 mid-year budget adjustments to town council.
appears by date?
So you had to obligate the funds by December 31st, 2024. So that was this past December. You have till December 31st, 2026 to actually fully spend the money. And the money is sitting in our fund balance right now. So we have the funds on hand.
Thank you.
I have no questions.
Could you just, I understand the fiscal aspect of it. Could you just talk about what's happening with the storm drains or what's being repaired?
I will refer to our Public Works Director, Sean Knapp.
Don't know how far you want me to go into that question.
Just an overview. I was just curious.
Sure. Yeah. It's a great question. So the town analyzed the storm drain needs, came up with a master plan, and the town council approved a list of locations primarily using ARPA funding. And we, as mentioned before, it has to be allocated. And so currently we're about probably 3/4 of the way through the money, and we have a pause right now where we're just making sure we have what we want to spend basically matches the workload that we have before we move forward and expend those funds. So we're in pretty good shape as far as we completed a significant amount of money or projects, and we'll see in the spring, we'll see a couple more projects be done. And that information is on our website. And when the new sites are chosen, that'll also be on our website. So I think we've completed somewhere in the range of 13 large pipe replacement projects. So it was quite significant.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? I really don't have any questions. I think it's pretty straightforward. It looks like it's mostly kind of known money that's either coming in from property taxes or money that's coming in for the parks programs. And the offsetting for the parks programs are pretty much all that money's going to pay people and pay for expenses involved with that. So it makes a fair amount of sense. Is there any more discussion? If not, do I have a motion to, I guess, to recommend the budget adjustments to the council?
Yeah. I move to recommend the mid-year budget adjustments to the council.
Second.
Any additional discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Did I do public?
No,
No, you didn't.
no, you did not.
Is there any public comment on that item? Seeing none, we'll return to the committee. The next item is the same information but relative to Hacienda de las Flores.
And I will recuse and leave the room as the subject matter is within 500 feet of my primary residence.
Katie, I think that's
Yep, we're good. We're good.
We're good.
Another slide deck. This will be pretty quick. So the recommendation is that your committee recommend fiscal year 24-25 mid-year budget adjustments for the Hacienda operating budget to town council. So some mid-year actuals for the Hacienda, the budget. This includes programming, the facility itself, and maintenance as well. We're about 65% of budget for actuals through December. The revenue there is leased from our tenant, and then expenditures are about 49% to budget through December. And then for general fund budget adjustments, we're recommending an increase in both revenue and expenditure appropriation for $50,000 related to utilities. So we have Wedgwood uses the facility for rentals. So there's increased utility costs related to that, and then they reimburse us for that actual usage. And that concludes my report.
No questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'm just wondering why you think the cost increased between the prior year and this year.
So we've looked at actuals based on year to date, looked at last year's, and kind of projected forward. So that's where we've.
Okay, that's fine. I understand it's budget neutral, so thank you.
I had a question. When I look at the summary that you have here, it shows total revenue less expenditures of something like we've got a loss of $800,000. Could you give us a little bit of?
So that includes maintenance staff who work at the hacienda that don't. So the revenue that is brought in is solely our lease revenue. A little bit of programming revenue from programs there. I think that's primarily though in our larger cost. And then the expenditures. What?
I was confused. Was that in thousands?
That is in millions. Although no. So it's not just the pure. It's for all the activities that happen at the hacienda. So that is the. That's it.
So it includes like town program planning costs or programming.
A little bit, or program, or maintenance, park maintenance that happen at the grounds at the hacienda, not just for the facility itself. So those larger, anything that's included in the operating budget that's specifically programmed there.
Okay.
So.
But then what you're saying is there's $700,000 to $800,000 worth of expenditures we are putting into the hacienda over and above the revenue. Mm-hmm. Which is reasonable if you consider it's a park available to the public, which it is, but it's also being now used fairly significantly for the wedding portion.
Yes, but we also use it for our town, we use it for summer camps, we use it for programming during the day. It is used by Wedgwood and they do rent it out, but it is also open to the public. And do you want to talk a little bit more about the operations?
If I may, so the revenue is showing generally just the revenue is generally just accounting for the Wedgwood revenue, but the revenue for our program registration goes into a different account. So it's all pooled together. So everything that we take in for our programs and classes is into our general recreation fund, but expenditures are specifically accounted from this account. So everything. Everything that we do to maintain the hacienda property is taken out of this account separately.
What we are really approving tonight, I suspect, is just the balance, the transfer. And I likewise find the total cost numbers doesn't, to me, make total sense that we're expending something like $800,000 a year on the hacienda, so maybe that could be checked and confirmed.
Yes. Is there a way to allocate some of the revenue for some of the things that take place there back into this account rather than the general account budget?
We can't. It's the balance between staff time and going to that level of detail from our registration system versus how it comes in and kind of allocating it to one account that requires staff to go through line by line and say this is for this. The system doesn't do it automatically. That is, as we look to implement a new ERP system and update our chart of accounts and improve some of those efficiencies, we can definitely look at that and having a better tie from one program to another program. So this is kind of the tools we have available to us, and looking at what's that balance between the level of detail that we need to run our programs versus report out on the financial, as for the operating program. So I hear your
you've actually got like 3 different things going on. You've got the wedding issue, you've got the parks activities and that sort of thing that are paid for. You've got a Parks and Recreation office sitting there that the town presumably would pay for the way they pay for all the rest of the things, and that would be a reasonable expenditure, but maybe not at all directly related to the revenue. You'd have to figure that out. And then you have other town-related activities that take place on the property, and that's a valuable thing for the people in Moraga. But we've never been able to get a good handle on how you account for all this, and so you end up with things like we're showing $800,000 here, which really isn't related to the wedding thing because it's got the expenses for some other stuff. The concern would be then maybe some portion of this ought to get allocated to the summer camps and that sort of thing.
I understand, and part of the reason why why we're pulling this out is based on the pure location of where these activities take place and where the funds are allocated and how they're being used. So that's also on the expenditure side part of why they're pulled out in this manner. So
I don't think we can solve the problem now, but we've never, over the many years here, gotten a handle on how you account for this and how we should be looking at all of these different things that take place at the hacienda and the cost involved.
Understood.
But it sounds like at this point, it would be a very manual process to go through the accounts and pull out the right things and allocating them to the right income. So, yeah. Or setting up a whole bunch more accounts. So, yeah, I don't know, like water costs for hacienda for an event and then for general town use. Yeah, it would be.
I think we got to move forward. And could you put up the final slide of what you're looking for a recommendation? Recommend mid-year adjustment budgets. If the treasurer's so indulgent, I would like to move that we accept or recommend the mid-year budget adjustments for the Hacienda de las Flores operating budget to town council, with a request that prior to this being presented to the town council, we can get a better idea of whether we're really running an $800,000 deficit on the hacienda.
Do we have a second?
Yeah, I second.
Before we actually vote on it, I'm going to open this for public comment. Seeing no public comment, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes.
I'm sorry, Bob, did you second?
No.
Amy second? I'm sorry.
Amy seconded.
All right. Sorry about that.
Okay.
And so the next item on our list is review and discuss the general fund 10-year financial forecast.
We're almost there. Okay, so this evening we are asking for your committee to review and provide feedback on the 10-year general fund forecast before we take it to town council. So, a little background, Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, recommends that governments forecast their major revenues and expenditures. The town has historically included a 5-year financial projection in the budget book, which tends to actually include like a year of actuals, some proposed budgets, and then goes out future years. So we have developed a 10-year forecast to really look at anticipated financial trends. And this is a tool to inform budget development. It's to help us guide financial planning. It is not a budget. It's not detailed enough, it's not nuanced enough, it's just to help inform and give information. So what we've considered into building the 10-year forecast is looking at our historical financial results. We then also look at our, you gotta look back to look forward. We look at our revenue projections from a variety of different sources. I love to look at CalPERS investment returns. I don't know what that says about me. And then recent economic trends, or maybe today some recent economic uncertainty. So we put that in there, and then we come up with our assumptions. This forecast is only for the general fund. It's not for any other fund, only the general fund. It's our primary operating fund. It's not about capital. Capital does a 10-year CIP, or 5-year, excuse me. And we're building off of our fiscal year 24-25 recommended budget. So those numbers that we walked through today and those recommended budget adjustments, that's our base. I specifically, in this case, have not built in a specific recession assumption. I'll tell you what's going to happen, but I don't know when. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, a lot of our revenue streams, property tax is one of our largest. Unless we have another housing bubble, we could debate all day whether we think that's likely or not. Also, property tax is a year lag. So if we start to see a recession, we're going to have a year to plan for that. Sales tax, another large revenue stream for the town. Our consultants are already building in uncertainty and potential recession impacts there. So we don't want to be too draconian. And then some of our other revenue streams, like sorry to pick on Parks and Recreation, like if we see a decline in revenues, chances are we're also going to see a decline in expenditures related to the programming costs. So this doesn't take any budget balancing measures. We are presenting net revenues less expenditures, nothing else. It then allows us to have a conversation about what type of balancing measures do we need to look, or what sort of things do we need to research. So it allows us to have that conversation, looking at the full picture before we've already kind of pushed put our thumb on the scale. And then in this case, the change in unassigned fund balance is only revenues less expenditures. It doesn't necessarily assume additional funding and reserves. This is a little bit of ordering of our reserve discussion versus the forecast. So, and then we're not assuming any other uses of town funds like Palos Colorados or Measure K. Kind of goes around budget balancing. We do have transfers in. Those are based on historical actuals, historical uses, and our known trends. It's not assuming anything new. I'm going to pause. I'll ask questions along the way because there's a lot of information here. So any questions on our general assumptions? Okay. So now our revenue assumptions. We've assumed 3% in property tax revenue year over year. That's based on historical actuals. Property tax, Prop 13, we have a 2% growth in assessed value as our cap, and then we get 1% of that assessed value. We do supplemental property taxes, hard to gauge, depends on turnover and remodels and assess it. So we 3% is a good number. Our Bradley Burn sales tax, that is the brick and mortar 1% that we get. It is not Measure K. It is not the transactions and use tax. We're using our consultant projections. I will say there's a lot of uncertainty right now in sales tax, and so this is something that we're monitoring closely. But it's also, as I said earlier, we get the information 2 months behind, and you can only look at the analysis quarter by quarter. So it is not, it's always a lagging indicator, but something we're keeping an eye on. And then all of our other revenue sources are increasing by 3.3%. That is our 10-year average of the Bay Area CPI, Consumer Price Index. Because this is a 10-year trend, we want to smooth it out. We don't want to assume wild changes in inflation. Any questions there?
So Measure K is not part of, you already
This
said
is
that.
not Measure K, no.
My observation is that if your revenue is going to go up by 3%, and the Bradley Burns, the number you're assuming is virtually no change, and you assume 3.3% expense, you're going to get the result that you have of, as you go out 10 years, you're losing a whole bunch of money. The only way to have that work out any better is to have the to use 3% over here. What that's saying is that we probably would count on more Bradley Burns, an increase in that, and that property taxes have to increase more than whatever the 3.3. And if you did that, all of a sudden the number's going to come out somewhat different.
Yeah. Yes.
Differently.
Okay, so expenditure assumptions, these will go in, these I break down into a little bit more detail. So our personnel costs, for salaries, our MOUs for the town expire June 30th, 2025, so there will be negotiations. I would think be ill-advised to stand up here and say we're going to assume they're flat because we don't have an MOU. So we use the Bay Area CPI, 10-year CPI. Healthcare increases are 12%. And that is in part because in our MOUs, we do have language that for town-provided healthcare, we will cover the cost of that healthcare up to 12%. And if it exceeds, then we'll have discussions with the bargaining units. So, and we've seen, last year, rates went up around 10% for the town. So it's not, maybe a little on the heavy side, but not out of the realm. And we're also not assuming a change in regular authorized positions. We do have some grant or limited term positions. Those are included through their authorized terms. Pension costs, my favorite topic. So we have normal costs, which are a percentage of salary. Those are set by CalPERS regulations, classic versus PEPRA. We're not assuming a significant change in contribution rates. Reality is they'll change around the margins, but we're not expecting a huge swing in those rates. Continuing to assume a 6.8 discount rate. So a discount rate is the assumed rate of return on CalPERS investments. It's currently 6.8%, so we're not forecasting a change or a drop. If the discount rate goes down, our CalPERS costs go up. CalPERS is in the process of their asset liability management cycle. That takes place every 4 years. They look at their actuarial assumptions. They look at if they're going to change the discount rate. There's a lot of data and public meetings that go into that process. If they change the discount rate, we will see it in our pension costs and our town finances in fiscal year 2027-28. And then for reference if you kind of span CalPERS returns over 30 years, the CalPERS investments have gained on average 7.7%. So, and then our unfunded accrued liability. So, already just explained what that was. We're projecting that using a CalPERS has a great tool. You can play with discount rates, actual rate of returns. We've taken into account the most recent return of 9.1%. So we've already put that in, and that's taken into consideration there. Here it is, my favorite chart. Let me go back. Any questions on personnel or pension costs? Okay.
Is this forecast assuming we operate the town as it's currently being operated and doesn't really account for building, more residents, more retail?
So it's take into account kind of our current budget assumptions. There is some assumptions that were, I think, built into last year's budget and this year's about planned projects or development, and pushes that forward. This is where can we take the information we have now as it currently lives, don't assume any major changes to those operations, because a lot of that conversation happens during budget development when we're really looking detailed at departments line by line and what project timelines and expected projects.
So the 10-year forecast is kind of an exercise in what ifs if we kind of remain static, but not so much taking into account some dynamic changes that could happen over the next 10 years until they actually are happening, and then it gets adjusted.
Yes, and there are models out there. We haven't built this one to it where you could say, hey, let's play with this or play with that. That would be there. You can get really complicated in forecasting models. We have not done that here. We're trying to let's do a broader 10-year look and see, kind of assuming the information that we know, using our best guess. So other expenditure assumptions, town insurance premiums, we're forecasting a 10% increase. Yes? Per year. And that's over the past 2-3 years, we've had dramatic increases in general liability, workers' compensation, et cetera. The good news is for this coming, based on fiscal year 26 rates, we think they're going to flatten or smooth out a little bit. But we've had such dramatic increases, and we all know the reality of the insurance market. Even though it's something we've decided to be kind of err on the conservative side because there's so much uncertainty. We're having issues with streaming, and so we're gonna have to follow up. It might be related to the other. We are trying to. We have the audio recording, so we can if it comes through. I've heard it's garbled. We can post it. If not, we'll have to say meeting recording's unavailable and have regular minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So utilities, we're forecasting a 6% increase in utilities year over year. We all know our rates are continuing to go up. And then all other operation and maintenance expenditures, we're again defaulting back to that 10-year CPI. And so with that, the bottom line is if we do nothing, our expenditures are projected to exceed revenues starting without additional balancing actions beginning next year. The red boxes show our actual revenue less expenditures. The green trend line is our deficit as a percentage of operating expenditures, because that also helps give a scale to the size of the problem based on our kind of budget of that year. I think there's the and so I mean this is the time to look at how we allocate resources. We have current revenue sources are limited for the town. We do have Measure K that has been primarily going to capital projects, roads, storm drains, sewer. So this is as we look towards the out years and each budget cycle in itself, we will need to really look at one-time versus ongoing measures. Some potential actions, I've kind of already talked about a few of them throughout the evening, but consider creating a policy of when and how we use the pension trust. So looking at what's our smoothing strategy goes to, how much do we think it's going to happen? How do we want to preserve the contribution for the out years while smoothing those operation costs? I think that is really a really valuable use. We've talked about the reserve policy this evening, but I also think looking at the reserve policy in general, is it 50% the right number? Are we looking at a flat number? We need to, it might be worth a conversation. It might not, I'm not, but we have a pension trust. We have a general fund reserve. I recommended last year with the mid-year budget cycle to do an insurance contingency reserve. So we can look at what we have and what our potential areas of risk are and come up with some other recommendations potentially. Identify new revenue sources, study them. Not conduct a fee study, look at maximizing our cost recovery. We have to present a balanced budget. That's my role for this upcoming budget cycle. But what this does, having this outlook now, it's not great to stand up here and say, look how things are. But this is the time to start having conversations about what we can do to mitigate the out years. This is the time to study. This is the time to come up with a course of action to really be strategic and think about how we can solve this in the long term. So this is the point of it, is it allows us to start a conversation. And of course.
Can you go back to that chart? So my understanding is the deficit is primarily that's reflected here is caused by the pension liability. Is that accurate?
It's definitely part of it. That's probably one of our largest cost increases. There are other things that are more, pension is outside of our control because it's CalPERS, insurance rates, health rates. There's things we can do around the margins to help mitigate costs, but there's only to a point. And some of those we have to just, so those are other areas that are also, I would say, big areas of increases there.
If we were to assume that our pension trust fund was fully utilized to help to smooth this out, how much of the deficit, if any, would disappear?
It depends on how you use it. It depends on how much it earns. I think that's where modeling use of the pension trust comes into forming that use policy. I mean, there's not enough in the pension trust to offset the full deficit. And then, if you'll indulge me for a moment, this is an example of one-time balancing measures versus ongoing. So the use of a pension cost is a one-time budget balancing measure. So you can use it once, but once it's gone, if we had used it to kind of till it was gone. So the dots there are kind of if we found an ongoing budget balancing solution, whether that's new revenue or cost cutting of $250,000, you would see that flow and it would increase incrementally a little bit year over year. Versus if you just said we're going to use $250,000 of the pension trust, which is a tool and we should use it, but then that's going to just increase the deficit in the out years because.
But then another valid use of the reserve is for accounting for shortfalls like this. Is that, yeah.
And again, the reserve is one time until
it's gone.
Until you don't have reserves. So, and so that's where you have to balance it. That's why that's why we created. That's why the pension trust was created, was to help smooth the impact of this until it comes to a time when it won't have as large of an increase. You can model using 2/3 of it to do the budget. There's so many different ways you can model it, but it's not going to be the only solution to the out years. It's
and
just
the pension curve is more like a bell curve, where this is just continuing to plummet. How do you account for?
So this only goes 10 years. In pension costs will peak in 32, 33. So. But it's really kind of flat until, sorry for flipping through a whole bunch of slides. That's why I have it on there. It's really not going to come down until
different times.
I'd say 36, 37. We could project the forecast out 20 years. At that point, I just don't think it's going to provide it's not going to be a useful tool.
Got it.
10 years is the max I would recommend looking out.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Do we have a motion?
I think it's mostly for information. My observation is you're going into preparing a 2-year budget. And what you might want to do is once you have those budget numbers that we know are going to be balanced, right now you're showing that we're going to be $1.25 million during the next 2 years in deficit, but we know that's not going to happen. What you might want to do is prepare the same graph, put in your actual budget numbers that get approved, and that will mean that kind of year 3 in this whole thing is going to start at 0. It won't be quite as bad. But once you have a deal where you're assuming 3% growth in revenue, or less than 3%, because his sales tax was was 0 basically, and you have 3.3% in expenditures, you're going to get this same thing. And so that says that we have to collectively figure out how we get those two numbers better.
Thank you, Treasurer. And I just want to really compliment staff and Katie for being willing to tackle, at least begin to tackle, a long-term financial plan for the town. it's really critically important. The town is not going to go out of business in 5 years, so we need to look longer. So, thank you.
I don't think we're, other than what the comments we've made, I don't know. I'm going to open this up to public comment. Not seeing any. I think that all we're doing is taking the information and making it available. The next item on our agenda is establish the next AFC meeting. I would assume it's going to be when you have a budget available.
I have a slide.
Oh, you have a slide.
You didn't get enough slides from me tonight. You needed one more. We do have a budget schedule, and so I have some proposed dates, and based on when we are planning to take an adopted budget to council. And then the other question. The other question is our website says that we meet at 5 p.m. It isn't, that time is not in our charter, and I cannot find that time anywhere else by the council action. So I think we have flexibility there, but I also know that some committee members have other commitments during those working hours. So I have a couple of dates up there. If Friday, May 2nd works for the committee, I am fine with that, but I would, those of us we like to spend time with you, but not necessarily our Friday nights. Would propose that to be a daytime meeting, but those are kind of help us meet our council meeting goals. And so I don't know if there's preference for those that work, and I can also send this, we can do it via email, but sometimes it's easier to have
I would suggest that maybe you want to do it via email so we can check calendars and things of that sort.
But
In terms of your scheduling, is there any date that you would be your favorite? Or maybe you let us know that in the email.
yeah, I mean, I would probably say that Wednesday, May 7th is probably the least available. The earlier on these dates, it gives us a little bit more time to prepare for council and incorporate your feedback. So that is not.
April 28th is the town council meeting.
April.
No, I'm looking at May, excuse me.
Yeah.
Let me try that again. Try that again. So May 20, or April 28th is a Monday. It's fine for me.
28th doesn't work for me. 30th. No, wait, we're not there. So,
Why don't you do it with an email, then we can.
I'll send out these dates.
if I can make a general comment, so I have three little kids that I love to be able to see. My preference, if at all possible, if there is an option to have a meeting ever before 5 o'clock, to about and concluding around 5, that range is somewhat ideal for me, and would be my preference on the usual. But if it strains other folks' schedules, again, just earlier we can do the meetings, the better for us.
Just do the email.
Okay, perfect. So those are that's the general timeline we're thinking, just to
I have to be recognized.
give you a heads up. So
On the email, I was just going to say, on the email, put in there something about times so that we can get some input from everyone. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for recognizing me. Sean Knapp, the Works Director. And Katie was being very considerate of all your times. I would mention that the first 2 dates are kind of what the staff have put together to make other meetings with the town council for the presentations that go on. So as we go farther out in the schedule, it becomes really difficult to meet our other schedules with the town council and the meetings that come up. And so the earlier in the schedule that you can schedule it, something is helpful for staff to make the other meetings moving forward.
Okay.
Anything else? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We'll assume that the clock is fast and you make it 6:30.
6:30, 6:30, you should do.
budget by 2 minutes.
You may not have had his title right here. That works too. Technically, we're just, you have a.
Yeah, I don't know how long.
Maybe.